Okay, what the hell was that? That was a very tropical, relaxing phone music that we had there on the intro. Don't know what happened there. Anyway, sorry guys. My camera, my fancy camera is broken, so we're gonna be dealing with low resolution today. But we have some nice videos queued up for you, and I know most of y'all listen to the audio only anyway, so it really doesn't matter. Hello and welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News and our weekly post-weekend roll-up, where we pick apart the insanity that is intentionally made to happen over the weekend while the voting public is not paying attention. The biggest development on the international stage right now is the Ukrainian-Russian ceasefire or peace talks, negotiations, and the media frenzy surrounding them. And this Monday marks year 3, the 3-year anniversary. Sorry, I don't know. I can't wordsing. I'm not wordsing correctly right now. This Monday marks the 3-year anniversary since February 24th, 2022, when Russian troops invaded sovereign Ukrainian territory. And of course, history did not start on that day. That's just when we started the general public, I'll say, started tracking what was happening in that part of the world. So after about 3 years, hundreds of thousands dead, a nearly 20% loss of territory, and now the potential American plundering of Ukraine's natural resources, the Ukrainian and European governments are starting to comprehend what the Kurds know. America ain't got no friends, or it's dangerous being a friend of America. So there's a quote, actually, this reminds me, attributed to Henry Kissinger, war criminal, beloved by America's ruling class, that goes, "It may be dangerous," and this is a quote, "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal or deadly." Now, there's no direct proof of him actually saying that. It's mostly anecdotal, but we do have him actually saying, quote, "America has no permanent friends or enemies, only interests." And, he also said, "A country that demands moral perfection in its foreign policy will achieve neither perfection nor security." And he also said, "The illegal we do immediately. The unconstitutional takes a little longer," unquote. So, anyways, I thought these were apropos of this subject, since he was a neoliberal warlord and helped establish the post-war U.S. foreign policy playbook into the modern era. We've got interventionism, secret proxy wars, coups, and engendering exploitable corruption in foreign governments, all part and parcel of the U.S. toolkit to leverage our vast resources and political power to maintain hegemony. The problem is the U.S. has been failing, and publicly. It appears that the Vietnam War that Kissinger started out supporting, then came to see as a drag on American power, was not a one-off. The fraudulent war in Iraq, the 20-year failure in Afghanistan, the self-destructive policy towards Israel that we've seen perpetuate over 15 months of genocide, and finally the failure of this Ukrainian enterprise. And I call it an enterprise because all pretense is gone that the U.S. ever cared about Ukrainian sovereignty beyond rhetorical talking points and the isolation and dissolution of Russia. Why then are the Ukrainians publicly not involved in their own peace process? Let's put on some B-roll, please. Why is Trump demanding 50% mineral rights from Ukrainians? That just kind of seems, if we're concerned about sovereignty, yeah, sovereignty indeed. The useful thing about President Trump is that he has an ability to package the dismantling of the United States empire, as the building of the United States empire. We're going to end wars. We're going to take over Greenland, the Panama Canal. alienate our Canadian ally to the north by calling it our 51st state, we shall achieve peace through strength by sending our European allies into a tailspin by demanding they contribute 5% of their GDP, their gross domestic product, to defense spending, while the United States, which spends 40% of the world's combined military budget, it's only 3.4% of our own GDP. So we're asking them to spend more than we do. So peace through strength is the tagline of the Trump administration's foreign policy, even though we have already passed the event horizon of imperial decline. But don't be fooled. He is an imperialist at heart. Great powers dominate the world, so he believes. We will do what we want when we can, and we will be better than a senile Biden administration, and we will recoup our losses when we can, like a corporate raider. His administration's decision to end the war in Ukraine is a transparent attempt to raid Ukrainian mineral resources. That's kind of like a byproduct. He's like, we've already sunk this much money into it. If we can recoup some of our losses, we'll take it. But that's not the main thing behind this. It's to leverage the European Union to pay their own way, cozy up to Putin for his own reasons, and to draw Russia closer to U.S. interests and thereby take them away from China, thereby isolating China. We know that they put some feelers in motion to arm Taiwan to a greater extent. We're going to pull up an article in a bit if we have time at the end where Taiwan's looking to have like $100 million weapons deal. Okay, we'll check on the figures, but yes, arm Taiwan, isolate China. If you can't tariff them, maybe try to outmaneuver them, but it won't work. The Biden administration's self-destructive, hawkish policy in Ukraine has already forced Russia, even irretrievably, into China's orbit. It's not safe to, be isolated by the United States. It's not safe to be our enemy or our friends. And European institutions are dissolving in real time as right-wing nationalist movements are attacking the framework of pan-European governance. Now, Germany's far-right AfD party may not have triumphed outright in these recent elections in Germany, which is significant because Germany is one of the leaders of Europe. But it's doubled its support in the strongest showing for a far-right party in Germany since World War II, projections showed. So the fabric of Europe is changing in real time, so we aren't entering some new age of peace. But the status quo has been terminally disrupted. So join us tonight on State of Play to examine this historic inflection point in detail. So real quick, while everybody's still filtering into the live, Mint Press is a non-corporate sponsored independent watchdog media outlet, newsroom, platform, whatever you want to call it these days. And if you're picking up what we're putting down, consider throwing us $5 a month on Patreon, because that'd be cool. It goes a long way to help support what we do here. And if you can't do that, or you don't want to, or you don't want subscriptions because you already have a zillion subscriptions, if you could just this live and comment, maybe that would also be helpful because we're heavily shadow banned and this pushes it out more into the algorithm. I see there's at least 500 people watching at the beginning, so there should be 500 likes. Thanks, guys. Either way, do what you want. We're just glad you are here. All right. Hello from Finland. Oh, yes. Hello from Finland. You're up late. Wow. Okay. I'm a night owl too. So yeah, I think I have some B-roll of your prime minister talking about how Europe needs to stick together. And, that's interesting since Finland was just added to NATO. So algorithm booster. Thank you, guys. Oh, hey, from Sydney. Whoa, it's like it's almost afternoon there. Wait, no, it's not. I'm getting my time zones mixed up. Cool. Got some people from Puerto Rico. Welcome. Come one, come all. This geopolitical issue affects you everywhere in the world, no matter where you are from. We got New York, we got Scotland, and LA. Wow, it's only 2 p.m. on the East Coast. Looks like someone gets to work from home. That must be nice. It's nice. Okay, so let's begin with the peace talk drama and the Trumpian Truth Social post that started all the hubbub on Friday, this past Friday. So 1 second. Oh, sorry, that's the NATO press release. Wait, what? Oh my God. Oh, did I accidentally exit out? Okay, sorry, stand by, guys. Look at the fun photos that are playing while we pull it up. Yes, look at the fun photographs of the Kursk region. Okay, Donald Trump picking it up. Okay, so I don't know if you guys saw today, but Emmanuel Macron of France visited the White House, and we'll get into that here in a second. I have found it. That didn't take me too long. I Are you like me and have just like a zillion windows open at all times? Yeah, because that's how I live my life. So present, share screen, engage. All right. So wait, this should be sharing. Okay. So here we go. This was, I feel like Donald Trump's kind of like Kanye West, where he doesn't have a nitrous addiction like Kanye West, where like when he's coming down off nitrous, he just like posts the most unhinged crap on Twitter. But like something's going on because he posted this at like early in the morning, probably after his first cheeseburger after 9 a.m. And this was from February 19th. That was last Wednesday. So I don't know if you guys saw it. It's worth talking about it because some of the things he says in it are true. Some of it is just like propaganda that I don't necessarily agree with. And it's basically endemic of U.S. foreign policy going forward. And then we're going to look at conservative politicians in America that have supported the Ukraine since the beginning, spiraling to figure out how to shift policies because they don't have any political convictions beyond do what Trump says. So think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Zelensky, talked the United States of America to spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, I don't know why he's calling himself Trump in all caps and quotes, will never be able to settle. A war that couldn't be won, yeah, probably. That never had to start. Yeah, it was one of the more avoidable wars that I've seen in the modern era. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe. This is not true. Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. No, they're still in loans. Europe's actually spent more than the United States. Why didn't this sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization? And that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. I would say that the geopolitical reality is like, yes, if the United States withdraws its military support from Europe, they don't really have a defense architecture and an industrial base to wage a war against Russia. So I guess in their minds, if they believe into the buy into the soup that like Russia is a heedlessly imperialistic nation that wants to like rule Europe in some sort of reimagination of the USSR, that's insane. But yes, this is more disturbing for Europe, and we'll get into that than it is for the United States. We have a big, beautiful ocean. There are many like it, but this one is mine. As separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half the money we sent him is missing. I'm gonna have to check those numbers. I don't think half of it's missing, but yes, there are. Look, we're not good at passing audits. Okay, when's the last time the Pentagon accounted for all the money? He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls. Actually, no, he's polling. Most polls agree that he's polling at 57%, which is like almost 10%, if not 10% higher than Trump is polling right now. He did have elections. He was elected, but yes, the elections have been postponed in wartime. And he was good at playing Biden like a fiddle. Okay, there's a bunch of myths, truths, and half lies, or whatever you want to call them. A dictator without elections. Okay, I don't think most Ukrainians I talk to definitely don't consider him to be a dictator, and they definitely agree that he was elected. So we're just gonna leave that there. He's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating the end of the war. Something only Trump can do, and the Trump administration. But Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, millions have unnecessarily died, and so it continues. Okay, geez. Well, way to throw our erstwhile ally under the bus. No matter how you feel about Zelensky, this was quite the ad hominem. So, yeah. Zelensky did get a bit of a bump over the recent couple days since Trump has been cozying up to Putin, and he's got a boost in his own country specifically. So, yeah. Anyways, that's just one thing that now everyone is having to pivot. All these people on the right who supported Trump or supported Ukraine now have to grapple with uncomfortable town hall meetings, like a congressman from Oklahoma yesterday at a town hall meeting on Sunday.
Personally, do you support Ukraine or Russia?
Well, here's. No, it's not easy, ma'am. It's not easy. It's not easy.
Is Zelensky a dictator? Yes or no?
That part I have a problem with that statement. Yes.
Okay. Did Ukraine start the war?
Because even though you're a war hawk, it's okay.
Well,
it's simple.
Do you support?
Did Ukraine start the war? Yes or no? Did Ukraine start the war? Yes
Let
or no?
him answer. Let him answer, ma'am.
well,
Yes, he will.
ma'am, I will. Just hang on a
Yes, he
second.
will.
Is that your question? Did they start the war?
That's part of it. I want to know where you stand
It's not part of
on
it.
Ukraine or Russia. We have been supporting Zelensky for years now. 3 years since Putin started this. Now we're isolating, or he is isolating America. He's talking.
Okay, no. I'm just giving this as a sample about what's going on within a certain group of people within America and their elected representatives. I don't expect you to agree with their statement or understanding of the war in Ukraine, but it's interesting. It's an interesting moment.
He's calling names and all this. Where do you stand?
Let me just say this. This is not the tactic that I would use to try to solve the problem. And I've said that openly.
Well, they have a lot of rhetorical challenges ahead of them. So we're beginning with this peace talk drama, but let's just back up for a second about it being this authoritarian thing. And yes, we do have reports and fairly compelling evidence that there's forced conscriptions and goon squads, rolling up in unmarked vans to take men off the street and put a rifle in their hands and stuff. But yeah, Zelensky was elected in not in 2014. That was Poroshenko. But that was the first presidency after the overthrow of the government. And Poroshenko led the country through the first phase of the war in the Donbass, which is what they would call it from a neoliberal sense, the Russian separatist forces into the Donbass region. He pushed them into the Donbass region. He began the process of integration with the European Union by signing European Union-Ukraine Association Agreement. That wasn't like a red line for Russia, although there were some warnings, the back channels like, hey, because of NATO expansionism, this is kind of making us uncomfortable. But Poroshenko's domestic policy promoted the Ukrainian language, the nationalism, inclusive capitalism, decommunization, administrative decentralization. And in 2018, Poroshenko helped create the Autocephalous Orthodox Church of Ukraine, separating Ukrainian churches from the Moscow Patriarchs. His presidency was distilled into a 3-word slogan employed by both supporters and opponents, Armia, Mova, and Vira, so military, language, and faith. As a candidate for a second term, he was defeated by Zelensky and a lot of nationalists within Ukraine, began provoking people in Russia, and then Russia was doing its own thing. Look, I don't want to get too bogged down in the minutia of the conflicts. The focus is not on why it started, but on where it's going. So it's okay if we disagree on some points of this, but I just want to say for the record, I have been getting friggin' blown up by people who are like, you know what? All you do is talk about Western imperialism, all right, at the expense of everything else. It's like, first of all, look, guys, I'm not a Russian citizen, okay? I don't vote in Russia. I don't live in Russia. I just know what my own country does and how it affects not just the rest of the world, but the people who actually live in, live in this country. And we must recognize that imperialism is not simply a system whereby big states do bad things to smaller ones. It has evolved all else a mode of political domination, extraction, accumulation, and underdevelopment that immiserates the global South, right? And so by every measure of the political economy, so you could talk about Russian imperialism, Chinese imperialism, whatever, I don't care. The United States is the foremost empire today. Those who deem China, Iran, Russia as imperialist states, which I don't I'm not saying that they don't engage in that. You can ask people in Central Africa and the Sahel whether or not Russia's engaged in imperialism. That's beyond the scope of this. The bottom line is that imperialist states are, okay, to compare any of its geopolitical rivals, the United States, any of its geopolitical rivals, to minimize its well-documented trail of blood that has stretched out over every corner of the earth in the last century. So you may talk about Russian imperialism and this kind of this dream to reawaken the USSR, which I've seen no basis or premise for, that just minimizes the much more violent history of the United States. And again, I'm not a citizen of Russia, and I'm going to talk about my own government and about how I would like to hold them accountable. So just so I don't get any of those stupid comments in the comments section. So yeah, I just want to put that out there first. So let's actually, now that disclaimer is over with, yeah, and then I think people in the comments are talking about NATO expansionism, which has been far more aggressive than anything we see to the east of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So let's take a look at who are we looking at first. Let's see. Well, at any other time before we look at this interview between Steve Witkoff and CNN, I just wanted to. I thought I was just taking part in the chat, but I really am just arguing with people. Yeah, well, we can't. Let's all try to agree on something. And at least we can probably agree on the next 40 minutes of this episode. So at any other time in the past 80 years, it would have been unimaginable that the U.S. president would be pressing for a meeting with President Vladimir Putin while calling Zelensky a dictator. Okay? That is a complete departure from established U.S. foreign policy, which has been heavily Russia-phobic. And Trump's approach stands in stark contrast to that of any of his predecessors, really. Like former President Joe Biden, who he claims was played by like a fiddle by Zelensky and allowed the war to start and continue for so long. It's also interesting that this is also a departure from Trump's first policy. The Democrats, like the neoliberal hawks in Washington and the Democratic Party, always said, Trump was too buddy-buddy with Putin, but he did arm Ukraine, So this is also a departure from what he has done historically too. And he said, quote unquote, we are either going to go sign a deal or there are going to be a lot of problems with them, implying the Ukrainians, unquote. Trump said in a speech on Friday. And on Saturday, this past Saturday, Trump said the parties were close to a deal. We're asking for rare earth elements and oil, anything we can get. We better be close to a deal. So the U.S. official involved in negotiations confirmed a deal could be reached fairly soon. We're going to address that. I don't see how that's going to happen before at least May. But a lot of people I've talked to about this over the weekend were like, like I live over here, and we're thinking more about like the end of the year, and we'll get into that shortly. So they said they were close to a deal on Saturday. A U.S. official, and this is coming from Axios News, involved in the negotiations, confirmed a deal could be reached fairly soon. The two sides continue to engage constructively on the process. Top officials on both sides are focused on getting this done, the official said. Trump says they think they can recoup about 400 to 500 billion from the resource deal, not the main story. It's just, he's like a businessman. He wants to recoup his losses. He needs his ROI, his return on investment. So that's what he's going for from the resource deal. But take everything Trump says with a salt shaker, because, he says a bunch of wild, out-of-pocket stuff, and it rarely ever comes to fruition. It seems like this is a leveraging technique. He's going to demand the rare earth minerals from Ukraine and plunder its economy unless Zelensky plays ball the way he wants him to play ball. So we've seen Trump historically just leverage the might and power and economic resources of the United States in order to get his way. So I think that could be something we're seeing right now. So here's Steve Witkoff, former American investor and real estate developer turned special envoy to the Middle East. Why he's talking about Ukraine, I'm not sure. Speaking with Jake Tapper, not the smartest tool in the shed. Wait, I think this is Jake Tapper, right? I don't really watch CNN.
Everybody watching can understand the need for diplomacy.
Yes, I got it right. This is Jake Tapper. All right. Looking here like a permanently confused child.
And especially President Trump wanting to reset the relationship with Russia. But what do you say to the millions of Americans and people around the world who are concerned that the United States right now doesn't seem to understand who actually launched this war against Ukraine and is actually trying to sidle up to the bad guys, Putin and the Russians, while screwing over?
Oh, you think there are good guys and bad guys in great power politics? No, there's not great guys, and then there's awful guys. And we have a track record of being awful guys.
Over the good guys, Zelensky and Ukraine. I think that is a fear that a lot of Americans have.
Well, look, I've heard that kind of talk. I don't necessarily agree with it. But let me say this. I'll make a few comments. The first is that the war, irrespective of who started it, needs to end. Too many people's lives have been expunged as a result of it, and it just doesn't make sense to the president. He wants to be the peacemaking president, peace through strength, and I don't blame him. I actually concur.
Again, I have so many problems with this slogan, peace through strength. It's like we're less strong than we've been since before World War II, and we're not getting it back. You're not fixing the recruiting crisis with your war on DEI. And I don't know, they're trying to cut the defense budget by like half over the next 10 years. Half. Guess what most of the defense budget is? People's payroll. Okay, so just think about that.
Right down the line with his thought process around this. That's one. Two, that the war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president has spoken about this. That didn't need to happen. It basically became a threat to the Russians. And so we have to deal with that fact. And those are real facts on the ground here. But be that as it may, the Russians have indicated that they are responsive to an end to this. There were very, very, what I'll call cogent and substantive negotiations framed in something that's called the Istanbul Protocol Agreement. We came very, very close to signing something, and I think we'll be using that framework as a guidepost.
I assume he was referring to the Istanbul Accords, which were like the third or fourth round of negotiations after hostilities broke out after February 2022. Yeah, so they're using the old framework that was most likely sabotaged by Boris Johnson and all the other neocons involved in this war in Ukraine. So they're just resurrecting, the old framework that could have been signed couple years ago in Turkey. So that is awesome.
To get a peace deal done between Ukraine and Russia, and I think that will be an amazing day. And the fact is,
questions about the press conference. I think it is not a coincidence that many of the narratives that are being voiced largely materialized after their conversation.
The
phrases he is saying are so deep and so correct. They are in total alignment with the way we see things.
Do you think it's good that the Russians think that the Trump administration is in total alignment with the way that Putin sees things?
I think we've had, Jake, by my estimation, almost 1.5 million deaths here. And finally, we have a leader, that is President Trump, who is determined to end the carnage. And so the only way you're going to end the carnage is if you have a relationship with the leaders of both countries that are involved.
I mean, yes, obviously they don't care about 500,000 deaths. There was 500,000 deaths, most likely 200,000 to 500,000 deaths so far in Gaza. They don't really care about ending the war so much as being seen as anti-war candidates, shifting their foreign policy away from entanglements outside of the Western Hemisphere and isolating China. So we're going to get to that here in a second.
I went over to Russia. I had a meeting with
Yes, Ellen Tapper is stuck on good, bad. The entire liberal media, I would say the entire, well, yeah, Fox News too, is good, bad. You know, everyone's evil or they're good. And this is how we want the American people to think of things. The United States are the good guys. The Ukrainians are the good guys. The Russians are bad. China's bad. You know, they have an authoritarian surveillance society, which is, with like social credit scores and stuff like that, and they hate freedom. So yeah, this is nothing new. It's been like this since after the Vietnam War. That's when it really started to get compromised because of how problematic having a complex narrative was for the American people.
President Putin. It was a long meeting, positive, constructive. Lots of good things got discussed, in large part because the president enjoyed a positive relationship with President Putin from his first term in office. And that then evolved into a positive conversation with the president on a telephone call from the White House. And then there was a positive conversation with President Zelensky. So I think.
Okay, see, a lot of this is, again, I just wanted to highlight that for like 4 minutes, because what is he really saying? Like, really? Like, there's no details. Like, even with the Israel-Palestine or Israel-Hamas ceasefire process, we had salient bullet points of what the actual peace process will look like. So I did see a really good point, and because there's nothing like solid or concrete, if you follow Russian Telegram channels, I did like this post they just made from Rybar in English. Based on the recent speeches of our president and the American, there is a strong, and this is a Russian Telegram channel that does like geopolitics and stuff. Sometimes I agree with Rybar in English. Sometimes I'm like, but this was a really good point. Based on the recent speeches of our president and the American, there's a strong impression that a peace agreement will be reached, but not in May as expected. We think this will happen closer to the end of the year, beginning of next year. That's kind of more of a reasonable, I mean, these things take time. There's a lot of political entanglements. Europe, and we're about to get there in a second, is not towing the line on this. They do not want this war to like end and be seen to have lost and have their the rest of Europe exposed to Russian expansionism as they see it. There are too many obstacles in reaching such an agreement now. The armed forces of Ukraine is being reinforced. Supplies are ongoing. Yes, because the Biden administration did some future proofing of the war in Ukraine with funding packages. So they're still being reinforced with the supplies, and Europe does not want to surrender. So in the spring, summer of this year, we are likely to see a new phase attempt of the AFU offensive, again, Armed Forces of Ukraine, for which reserves are now being hastily accumulated. So, yep. And one of the interesting things is there's the Biden administration was pressuring the Armed Forces of Ukraine to lower the conscription age to 18. Right now, it's 25, and I'm not sure if the Biden administration will
frontline training
was successful in that, but I know that the Ukrainian government, if they don't want to fight, they're going to have to start conscripting people younger. But there's not a lot of young people left. Yeah, this is just them doing some trench fighting, basic stuff. They clearly don't know how to handle their weapons.
Vitaly admits he didn't choose to come.
I got called up. At first I was in shock, but then, well, I understood.
Meanwhile, the battlefield grows ever more physically demanding.
In just a year and a half of this war, everything's changed. Soldiers walk for miles because if you drive, a drone will spot your car and you're done for.
Yet Ukraine is resisting calls from the US and others to bring the age of mobilization down from 25 to 18. There are military recruitment posters in front of this prestigious Kyiv university, but few of the students here favor lowering the draft age.
As for me, I just feel I'm not yet ready. I'm not grown up yet. We've already got the...
That's definitely a more responsible approach than the U.S. military. Like, I went through basic training when I was 18, and I felt ready. This guy's clearly more self-aware. Also doesn't want to die on the front line. So, yeah, I get that.
Huge systemic labor shortage in all sectors. It could paralyze our economy.
Perhaps the biggest problem with drafting 18 to 25s, though, is demographic, says Anna Osipchuk from the sociology faculty.
This cohort is the least populated. There are more children and there are more adults. So really, if we draw heavily from these cohorts, it won't really help the situation, but it will damage the future too much.
Ukraine would rather see its young people have children and raise families than die in battle.
Something to consider, though, even though Trump's pushing for this negotiation, as I said before, we don't really have any details. A lot of people are saying it's going to take some time. It's a hugely complicated issue. Any peace talks, and the Russians said outright, they don't want like this ceasefire of convenience. They want it to be long-term. If they finally sign it, it needs to be long-term and has guarantors in France, Germany, the rest of the European Union, guarantees from them. And so, look, the summer of this year, there's a possibility we're likely to see a new phase attempt of the AFU offensive. So the armed forces of Ukraine may attack again, something close to along the lines of what we saw in Kursk. The Kursk offensive from last summer, which we said was going to fail and not really have any long-term gains. That's exactly what happened. So they'll probably, in order to put pressure on the peace process, probably try another spearhead thrust, or potentially try another spearhead thrust into Russian lines to try to regain some lost territory and come from a stronger bargaining position going into the negotiations. So a summer offensive, it's generally what happens in the summer in Europe after all the snows have melted. They'll try to grab some territories, enter negotiations, and, their leadership will try to improve its position by completing the liberation of DPR and LPR from their perspective. So here, of course, there are many nuances since like Ukraine is led by, say, rather inadequate authorities who may do something unexpected, like something as foolhardy as like the Kursk invasion. But in the end, everything is moving towards an agreement. There's not much Ukraine, like Israel, cannot be supported without direct U.S. military support. And even though Europe's done more to support Ukraine than we have, just by the numbers, doesn't really mean, they can keep doing it without us. So, like, Europe is kind of preparing for this post-America, or NATO is preparing for a post-America alliance. Let's look at the German chancellor speaking today. AfD almost won, but a slightly less far-right conservative government is in there right now. So this is about him and European solidarity. Germany and France are like the two big leader nations of the European Union. So we will look to them for leadership going forward in a post-America NATO, if it comes to that.
Die absolute Priorität aus meiner Sicht ist, dass die
Friedrich Merz, incoming chancellor for Germany. He is also an ex-BlackRock executive, so that's fun.
Die Europäer verständigen, dass sie einig sind untereinander. Zurzeit findet der größere Teil der europäischen Politik ohne Deutschland statt. Das hat natürlich auch etwas mit dem Wahlkampf zu tun und auch jetzt dieser Zwischenphase. Aber ich stehe im engen Austausch mit sehr vielen Ministerpräsidenten, Staats- und Regierungschefs der Europäer.
Oh, sorry. I know a bunch of you guys listen. So let me go ahead and narrate this for you. Let me turn down the German. My grandmother tried to teach me, but I was a horrible student. So let's just look at the subtitles.
The absolute
priority from my perspective is that the Europeans come to an understanding, agree, and stand united amongst themselves. Currently, a significant part of European politics has taken place without Germany. This has, of course, something to do with the election campaign. Yes, in its interim phase. But I'm in close communication with many prime ministers, heads of state, and government leaders from the EU. And for me, the absolute priority will be to, as quickly as possible, strengthen Europe so that we can step by step achieve true independence from the USA. This is the first time we're hearing that. Keep this in mind as we go forward. I would never believe that like this on a television show. I'd have to say something like this. But after the statements from Donald Trump last week, it's clear that the Americans, at least this part of the Americans, this administration, is largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. I can't really argue with that. I mean, I don't think they want to be completely separated from Europe, but they're definitely trying to get something out of it. So I'm very curious to see how we will approach the NATO summit at the end of June. Yes, there are not going to be too many more developments on this until the NATO summit itself this summer. Whether we will still be talking about NATO in its current form, whether we need to establish much more quickly independent European defense capabilities. So this is an absolute priority for me, and I have no illusions whatsoever about what is happening from America. Just look at the most recent events, what a certain Mr. Elon Musk has done in terms of interventions in the German election campaign. This is an unprecedented occurrence. Intervention from Washington with no less dramatic and drastic, ultimately brazen, than the interventions we have seen in Moscow. We are under such massive pressure from both sides. And that's my absolute priority now, is just truly to establish unity in Europe. And this is in tension, with a lot of, far-right nationalist movements through in Italy and France, really questioning, the European Union. And, from a leftist perspective, I'm not a big fan of the EU. But it's really interesting seeing that this is an unprecedented tension between this idea of pan-European multiculturalism and far-right nationalism that's picking up currently. So, I think Germany, the United States are all on a political inflection point. And something that we haven't seen before also, I don't know if you guys were tracking this, the UN resolution was put forward to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine today, Monday, or tomorrow if you're across the Atlantic. The U.S. voted against a UN resolution today condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, siding with Moscow and other non-democratic countries like North Korea, Belarus, and Sudan. And the non-democratic countries thing, of course, had to be put in there by the media. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but why it matters. Okay, so first of all, the Trump administration has found itself increasingly isolated on the world stage as it seeks to broker peace on the third anniversary of the war in Ukraine. A three-page resolution presented by Ukraine condemned Russia's aggression and called for the complete and unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces from the Ukrainian territory. Okay. The U.S. was just one of 18 countries to vote against the resolution. And so just to pull up a map here, if you just want to take a break from doing what you're doing and look at the screen. All right. In favor. Okay. So we got orange. But everywhere in Europe except what's that? Belarus, Hungary, one Baltic state. Oof, I don't know why I'm blanking on my Baltic geography right now. And then the U.S., Panama. And, wait, is that Panama? Yeah. Okay. So, and then some very pro-Russia countries in the Sahel. Of course, they're getting a lot of military support from Russia. This is obviously how they would vote. North Korea, yes. Obviously, North Korea has an increased defense relationship with Russia. And so that's interesting. And of course, guess who also voted to not recognize this wording for the resolution? Israel. Israel's going to vote for the United States because the United States has been voting for Israel at the UN. However, it wasn't a Security Council resolution, so it passed. Yes. Someone asked Hungary. Yes. Viktor Orban in Hungary is very, very pro-Russia. So that's not surprising at all. Now, what's interesting here is the European unity. So all of including Turkey. Turkey, historically, a regional ally of Russia, even though they have a complicated history of fighting each other, voted with the majority of UN countries to condemn it. So in recent days, when these efforts failed, the U.S. is starting to push numerous countries to instead support a rival resolution that mourned the loss of life and called for a swift end to the conflict. The U.S.-backed resolution, which was just 3 paragraphs, did not blame Russia for starting the war. Quote, a simple historic statement from the General Assembly that looks forward, not backwards. A resolution focused on one simple idea, ending the war, unquote. Acting UN Ambassador Dorothy Shea said in a speech urging member states to adopt the resolution. So basically, the European amendments were then adopted with the support of 53 member states, forcing the U.S. into the awkward position of abstaining from its own draft resolution. So it was introduced, then it had to get amended, and U.S. abstained from that one. But I'd rather not explain it now. But it's sort of self-evident, I think, Trump told supporters Monday when asked why the U.S. opposed Ukraine's resolution. And this matters because this dramatic change in U.S. policy towards Russia has shocked Ukraine, Europe. It's fueling fears among U.S. allies that the Trump administration will side with Moscow as it tries to negotiate an end to the conflict. I think it's already sided with Moscow. The Trump administration has cast a shadow of doubt not only across embattled Kiev, but across an entire continent that has trusted the U.S. for decades as its most powerful protector and partner. And that's why NATO is preparing for a post-America alliance. And all of this, Trump has had a bone to pick with NATO for years, right? He said it on his first administration. And what's interesting about this, and, part of it is trying to get more buddy-buddy with Russia and have a better security relationship to isolate them from China. That's a little more to get into, but I don't see it happening. It's already too late, as I said before. What's interesting is Trump, by gutting USAID and rolling it into the State Department under Marco Rubio, there goes our soft power. There goes any pretense that, all of these nonprofit NGOs that support opposition groups in other countries whose government we don't like is no longer has a degree of separation from the actual State Department. Is crazy. So there goes our one instrument of soft power, one of our instruments of soft power, which I'm not going to cry about. That's gone. And now NATO is a U.S. institution. NATO is an arm of U.S. foreign policy. And this signals a massive shift from this idea of North Atlantic expansionism. And again, reorienting toward the Western Hemisphere, bullying Greenland, Panama, and any other country we don't like, reimposing sanctions on Cuba and Venezuela, and refocusing on keeping China out of our backyard in the Western Hemisphere and isolating them over the Strait of Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. So, so I guess we saw Friedrich Merz, the center-right leader who just was elected for Germany, said that his priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible to achieve real independence from the USA. I don't think I've ever seen someone say something as bold as that, but it just really goes to show that, again, my premise at the beginning was Trump, while parading himself as this peacemaker that can get something done, is interesting because he packages like the expanding of U.S. power and empire. That's the brand, but when he's actually doing it, he's actually dismantling it. So cool. I don't think this bodes well for the U.S. empire, which a lot of people should be rightly excited about. And yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. When it comes to like this Russia thing, like we have had Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who will also be visiting Trump this week, apparently. They're among several European leaders who have signaled that they're prepared to boost defense spending as Trump steps back. And, Starmer himself, I don't know if you remember from last week, is committed to putting boots on the ground if necessary to guarantee Ukraine's safety. European leaders have been discussing potential post-war reassurance for force to be deployed to Ukraine to deter against Russian renewed aggression. It's a bunch of saber rattling. Again, I don't think a ceasefire deal is going to happen as quickly as people hope. And then NATO allies are in a stage of anger, denial, and despair after Pete Hegseth last week effectively declared an end to America's role as the primary guarantor of European security, particularly over Ukraine. What a post-U.S. security situation will look like, Nobody knows. They're scrambling to figure it out. There'll be the NATO summit in June, but before that, it's all speculation. So basically, though, why it matters is, Trump's dramatic change in U.S. policy toward Russia, will side with Moscow overtly. This is a completely different foreign policy footing that's existed since the post-World War II era. And that's crazy. U.S. empire continues to decline. I wouldn't worry too much about the mineral stuff. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. That seems more like a negotiation leveraging technique. So, yeah, someone said so friggin' excited. Yeah. Do you think we're closer to or further from World War III than we were 6 months ago? Well, I don't think. Well, it depends what Trump intends for Iran. I think that's the next flashpoint. Again, I've talked ad nauseum on this platform about why a invasion or attack on Iran is unviable. It's not just my position. It's even the position of really, really hawkish think tanks like the Saban Center for Middle East Studies, owned by Haim Saban, the ex-IDF soldier Zionist billionaire who owns Universal Studios. Even think tanks funded by him are like, war with Iran is probably not going to be a great idea. And then, of course, the Atlantic Council and, the Center for Strategic and Independent or International Studies, the CSIS, put out a war games analytical report last year that says in 3 weeks, in a shooting war with China over Taiwan, the U.S. is going to run out of munitions. So I don't know what can we do to accomplish it. However, just like the Cold War, it's not a Cold War for a lot of people. Like, I think World War II didn't look like World War I. World War III is not going to look like World War II. I've heard some knowledgeable people assert that we're already in World War III. It's just going to be more of like a Cold War situation, which is a really Western-centric way to frame it, because the Cold War was, in fact, a hot war for a lot of people. I don't think we'll see any big, great power escalation in the near future. So like U.S., China, Russia, I don't see that happening. Yes, he canceled the election, imprisoned political opposition, imprisoned priests even. That's very dictator-like. Well, hey, we might see that in America, and people will still be calling us a democracy. No. I'm not refuting any of this. I was just saying a lot of Trump's comments on his unhinged Kanye West-esque Twitter post was misleading. And that's all I was addressing. So he made other political parties illegal, for Christ's sakes. Yeah. Again, his approval rating is still pretty high, but it's kind of rich. I kind of resist anytime that Trump calls people a dictator, because he so clearly wants to be one. What's a triple lock system? What? Hang on. It's a lock? Wait, is this some sort of domestic Ireland policy thing that I'm completely blanking on? I'm not sure exactly what that is. One thing about Zelensky's just carried on policies by the first nationalist leader that took power after Lukashenko left in 2014. And yeah, we've seen, I mentioned the videos of, the goon squads driving up and taking military-aged men off the streets and putting them in the front lines. I think ending the war is a way to reestablish a lack of authoritarianism, but yeah, it's hard to say that anyone that cancels elections is still a democracy. And, there have been a lot of accusations that the system was rigged in the first place, but I haven't seen any concrete hard evidence of that. But yes, not to mention the U.S.-led coup, at least supported coup. I haven't seen any compelling evidence that it was completely initiated by the United States. I know a lot of our coup attempts are basically opportunistic in nature, but yeah, to say that the United States wasn't involved in that coup, or the coup that established the Hashemite monarchy in Jordan. Yeah, fingerprints all over that one. Sad to see the Silver Spoon boyfriends on the Duran lose credibility with their sycophantic love and for the Musk Trump billionaire foxes in the hen house. Russia is also reporting widespread incidents of war crimes. I guess investigations are pending. I follow Russian and Ukrainian channels. Everybody's doing war crimes in that fight. Like, both sides are like not taking prisoners. So if people are in a trench line, whether it's Russian or Ukrainian, and they take a position, people put up their hands, they're just getting shot. I've personally seen war crimes being perpetuated on both sides. That's something to expect during a conflict like this. Doesn't excuse them, but yeah, everybody's doing that right now. Samantha Wiley, pro-Russia is just a label you put on anything you don't like hate speech. I'm sure you understand that. Yeah, pro-Russia. It's kind of like, what do? You hate democracy? You hate freedom? Bro, you sound like a communist, even though Russia's not. They've gone through a bunch of capitalist reforms in the post-Cold War era. But why all the imperialist talk? I thought this was a cooking show. Yeah, it is a cooking show, as the young kids say, like when you're cooking, right? Yeah, sorry about all the talk about imperialism. It's almost like it dominates so many lives and policies around the world. I fully agree with the idea that NATO expansion led to this, but once Russia invaded, Zelensky did what any leader would do: martial law, no elections, and no groups infiltrated by Russia. It's not an invalid point. And there are plenty of infiltrated groups by Russia, especially in the Donbass region. There's a whole bunch of historical precedents for suspending elections during wartime. I'm really not so sure that was the best information play, the best PR stunt to do, especially when you're framing this as a fight for democracy over the authoritarian, autocratic nature of Putin. But then again, Ukrainian information operations are not as good as they were a couple of years ago. I think they're getting burnt out. Did you see Jeffrey Sachs' presentation to the EU Parliament? I heard about it. I heard like Danny Haifong reference it and some other people, but no, I haven't watched that yet. But I guess I'll do that after this. Peace through war, love through hate. What else we got? Trump called it a ridiculous war. I mean, I think most wars that have happened in the modern era are completely ridiculous. Yes. Okay, Zelensky was elected in 2018 to end the civil war in Ukraine, but was ramped up instead. The U.S. NATO is to blame for what's happening in Ukraine. Zelensky was only a puppet. And as I said at the beginning of this episode, the fact that Ukrainians and Ukrainian officials aren't even involved in the peace talks at this point really goes to show you that this is probably an American project. It was an American adventure to see if they could weaken Russia, to isolate them economically, politically, and to use the massive option of annihilation to exile them from the SWIFT banking system. It didn't work. None of this has worked. So yes, I do think, as much as I loathe Trump as a fascist clown, this is a more sane Russia-Ukraine policy. It is. Of course, Ukrainians are, hopefully the war will stop, but I do worry that, Trump will try to basically steal all their resources, which would help them rebuild their economy after a war of attrition. So, yeah. NATO, the Irish government, and the UN have to agree to sending troops to peacekeeping. I don't know if they sign a peace agreement, you would expect Russia to follow it, especially with all that's riding stake, everything that's going on right now. Especially if they get a good deal, which seems likely. But Europe is pretty demilitarized right now. You'd need a lot of troops to secure that border in a peacekeeping operation. So, where are they going to get the troops from, man? tens, hundreds of thousands. So Russia has to come away with some Ukraine territory at any agreement, which means the war will never end. Yeah, well, a lot of learned people think this will end in a frozen conflict just because Trump says there's going to be a peace agreement, just because Russia seems to be hopeful, or Russian officials seem to be hopeful. This is a massively complicated thing to end, especially with, like, maybe if Russia had some massive decisive victory, but it's a war of attrition, trench line to trench line. And just like that, the whole political process of implementing a ceasefire is also going to be a slog. The most salient thing to take away from this is the security situation in Europe has changed forever. It is the end of an era. And any supposition on what that's going to look like is moot at this point. I think a ceasefire by May may be a little too optimistic. So yeah, we'll see. And we hope to end the violence and end all wars. And, you know, if Trump wants to, you know, isolate us from NATO, destroy USAID, millions of people will be fatally affected by that. Because, of course, we leverage medical aid and support to governments in order to coerce them to do what we want them to do. But I don't know. It's the end of an era. There's going to be consequences for a lot of innocent people. Hopefully this empire ends and we can become just a regular old nation state instead of a bloodthirsty extractive power in the world. So I think Trump's a good vehicle for that, just like Netanyahu's a good vehicle for exposing the Israeli state for what it is, and hopefully ending that project soon as well. Well, thank you so much. Just wanted to get into that thing for today. I wish I could give more of a detailed prognosis about what the future holds, but yeah, we only had an hour, and this is completely uncharted territory. It's unprecedented what we're seeing right now. So it should be interesting to watch over the next coming months. And again, be looking out for the NATO summit in June. That's really going to give us a good idea about what to look like going forward. And we will see you next Monday. All right. Cheers, y'all. Have a good week and try to stay mentally healthy amongst the madness. Have a good night.